Hey everyone, welcome to Listen, Love, Connect. I'm Savannah Paul Fox, your host, and today's guest is Sumari Fubara. We'll be talking about finding the right therapist from a survivor's approach. Let's head over to Somi and get started.
Listen, Love, Connect is brought to you by Exceptional Heroes.
So today we are talking about finding the right therapist from a survivor's approach. And so Somi and I came up with this topic because I was telling her about an individual who was having a difficult time finding a therapist. And I've also had this experience myself, finding the right therapist for me. So a few things that we want to talk about on finding the right therapist is questions to ask. What are some questions you think, Somi? Because in all honesty, how we met was because of my mom's friend. And I somewhat remember our first conversation and I somewhat don't, just because of the state of mind I was in. Did I ask you any questions or did my mom ask you any questions?
Oh, yeah. You didn't as much. Because I feel you're a bit more reserved then. You've definitely come out of your shell. And that's just even your personality, which is not a bad thing, is that you're teaching yourself to be a practiced extrovert, but you're introverted, which is fine. And I think then, especially when you first meet people, and because you're like, oh my gosh, they want me to see a therapist.
Yes.
So you already almost in fight mode, no, I don't want this. You're not gonna make me do this. So you didn't ask a lot of questions, but your mom did. Honestly, I don't remember all the questions she asked, but one of the things I do is I just did this on Tuesday. When somebody was like, listen, I want to introduce you to someone I really feel like she's looking for a therapist. And so we were talking and I said the same thing to her. I said, a lot of times people approach this relationship, the therapeutic relationship, as a hierarchy. Yes. or expert. And, I'm this broken non-whatever thing over here. And I always said, one of the first things I told her, I said, your daughter is not broken. Mm-hmm. And if you have this mindset that your daughter is broken, I'm probably not the best one for you because I'm going to tell your daughter the opposite. But to answer the question about the three questions, they're really simple. I mean, there are definitely more questions you should ask, but obviously for the sake of time and just to make sure that people really get the meat of this conversation we're having, you should first ask any therapist that you are trying to collaborate with. And I'm using that word intentionally because it is a collaboration between you and the therapist. You should ask them if they're trauma informed. Not trauma aware, but trauma informed. Because interesting, 12 years ago, I was onto this concept, but it seems like everybody's catching up to it now, that there is no mental health illness, disorder, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't have a root in trauma. Mm-hmm. There's no individual that I've ever met or worked with, just like I did with you. One of the first things I asked you is to just go through your story, not your trauma story, but just your life story. And I wanted to know, from your earliest memory until present, who is Savannah? What does she remember? What things about your personality? And that's how you get to know someone, and that's how you build trust. But a person is not a therapist that is not trauma informed. The first thing they will do, especially if somebody else connected you, or especially if they know that you had some recent trauma, you can say it. What did they ask you?
What happened?
What happened? What happened? All right. You first time you meet them, you're in a session with them and they're like, okay, so this is somebody you don't have a relationship with. You don't know from Adam, if you need to use the phrase, there's nothing. And the first thing they say to you is, okay, tell me what happened. And to date, I've never asked a trauma survivor that question. I don't even think I've asked a client that question, just in general.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, this person and we're just meeting each other.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's the difference between being trauma aware and trauma informed. And actually asking that question, what happened? I wouldn't even say that's trauma awareness. I think that's just, that's not even being trauma aware, because that's like trauma awareness 101. You do not ask a client what happened or force them to tell you their trauma narrative until they are ready.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing I would ask them, say to everybody, find out from your therapist, are they trauma informed? The second thing I would say is, what is your cultural competency? I know this sounds very, but it sounds very like studious, if you will.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, as mental health professionals, we take an oath.
Mm-hmm.
It's psychiatry, psychology, social work, any form of mental health. Actually, medical doctors take a similar oath. It's called do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
So these questions that I'm saying to ask are to help you ensure that no harm is brought to you.
Yeah.
So asking your therapist or your potential therapist, I would like to know what your cultural competency is, especially if you're a person of color. That is so important. And your therapist, I don't care if your therapist is another person of color, but mainly if your therapist is not a person of color, you need to have an understanding of where they are in a culturally competent standpoint. Because if they are bringing their culture and their biases and their, prejudices and everything, which can happen into the therapy space, they are going to do you harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the third thing I would ask them is finding out how long, again, this is to help people.
Yeah.
So I need people to understand that from a perspective. And if it's not helpful to you, that's fine. Everything we discuss may not be helpful for everybody. But find out from your therapist how long they've had a client. Okay. The reason being, one of the things that happens in therapeutic relationships, which is not a good thing, is this element of codependent relationships. So for me, I can only speak for me. I always tell people, I'm not trying to be your therapist for 25 years. Yeah, that's not going to work. So if you're looking for a therapist, there are people that will tell, I know people, they're like, I've had a therapist, the same therapist for 25 years. And I'm like, every week for 25 years, or even if you say every other week for 25 years, that should be a red flag. So if your therapist has, and especially because when you're working with trauma survivors, trauma treatment or therapy is a process. Mm-hmm. So you can't necessarily put a time frame on it per se, but 25 years kind of takes the cake. So I always tell people, it's like, if your therapist is like, oh yeah, I keep my clients for, 15, 20, 25 years, that's a huge red flag. So if you go through, are they trauma informed? Are they culturally competent? And what is the length of time that they have with their client? I almost always, if not always, will you eliminate all the things that you don't want and to see all the things that you do want.
Mm-hmm.
So you will be able to get a comprehensive, holistic idea of this individual. Now, here comes the, I guess, where it can get a little tricky. So let's say, because this may happen, very real, you ask me, Somi, are you trauma informed? And I'm like, yes, I am. And then you move on. You have to have, be prepared, right? Be prepared for those that will say yes. Now, for those that will say yes, if they're really trauma informed, they will automatically go into detail. And give you an outline, which is something I did with your mom, you and your mom. Is like, okay, they kind of lay out how they approach therapy and what you can expect from the therapeutic relationship. And so what you have to listen for is, does this, like you said, does it align with me? Does it resonate with me? Do I feel safe? Yes. And do I feel like, okay, this could work? And we'll get into, further things, but again, have your follow-up questions, if they say they're trauma informed, if they say they're culturally competent, make sure that you have done your homework. That's going to be very important. I think a lot of times, sometimes people will contact me and they're like, oh, I just found you on Instagram, or I just, and I'm like, but you know nothing about me.
Right.
I could be a serial killer. I don't know.
I hope not. You're my therapist. I know.
No, I'm saying that just over a sense. I mean, keeping this light, that a lot of times there's so much blind trust, and blind acceptance, especially from a therapeutic standpoint. It's like, oh, they're therapists, of course, they're not going to do me harm, and they're going to be safe. But that's not always the case. Therapists do some really awful things as well. So again, the biggest thing I would say in asking those questions, be clear as to what you want. As Savannah said, make your list, ask the questions, have follow up, and check in with yourself. Because there are people that talk and your intuition, everything in your body is like, oh, this is no. Right. For whatever reason, we go forward with it. And I'm like, no, listen to that feeling, to that voice, whatever. And, but I should say finding the right therapist can be a frustrating process, especially, and you can speak to this, especially if you live in an area where there are not a lot of people of color. And that's one of the criteria for you is let's say you want an Asian woman. That can get difficult. Yeah. Or you say you want a Native American male therapist that's trauma informed. That can be a difficult process. So again, being a bit patient with the process is going to be important.
Yeah. And one other thing, not just with questions, but before you even start interviewing therapists, you need to put together a list of things you're looking for. I know I came from going to school to be a child psychologist, and I know not everyone's background is going to be this, but looking up what type of therapist you want, I knew straight away I didn't want group therapy. I wanted one-on-one with someone. So putting that list together and put what is your top priority that you want them to. And when you're asking these questions, make sure that they are what you align with, if that makes sense.
Yes. That's a very, very, very good point. That list, is very, very important.
And that kind of goes into like speaking up for yourself. I know a lot of times I wouldn't speak up in my therapy sessions until afterwards, but how can we help people feel comfortable speaking up to therapists? Because we do feel like it's like the white coat type thing, like you guys are the know-all, the gods of therapy type thing. I know for me, it's still a struggle. Um, so what are things that we can do to help advocate for ourselves in a therapy session?
Well, again, that's also a process,
Yeah.
depending on your personality. I have clients that the hour goes by like that because
Yeah.
they're like, and I have this and this and this and this and that, and you're like, and you listen. And then you have other clients, especially if you're working with children, that you have to be really prepared.
Yeah.
You have to have the tool set or the skill set to be able to capitalize on something they said or something that's working, or of a way to kind of help them feel comfortable. Now, I would say the biggest thing for a lot of clients is just not feeling emotionally safe yet. And one of the things we talk about in therapy is building trust or rapport.
Yeah.
And that can take time. So it's not, I think one of the greatest gifts that a therapist can give the client is not making them feel forced to talk. Because if you have a client that is not very talkative, there are other ways to engage them. There's so many other ways. With children, you can engage them through play. Find out some of the things that they like, and then bring that into the therapeutic space. Let that be a part of their therapy. So for instance, if I were to speak of you and in the time that Monroe, Shelby, or complete showing, if I was like, hey, Savannah, I'm so interested. I would love to know more about, Monroe and your work with Monroe. And you were all over that. And now it's fine because we are still getting to know each other. And even in the beginning for you, because it took a few months. And then I got that, 1 a.m. call?
Yeah. Yep.
But, and where you were like, okay, Somi, I'm ready to tell you what happened now. And I'm like, it's 1 a.m. But, the kind of therapist I am, I'm like, okay, because with you, I know that if I didn't give you the space now to when you were ready, the next day you would have been like, okay, I'm over it now, and I don't want to say anything. But even that element of being an active listener, so that the client feels validated to assert themselves, is so important. And I, when we first started working together, we used to talk about that all the time. I used to tell you, I was like, part of empowering you is making sure that you feel like you can assert yourself and you can set boundaries in any situation. Remember when I first introduced mental health days to you?
I hated it. I hated those things.
But here's the beauty about and this is one of the things I really appreciate about you, but you didn't even realize it. You would say, oh, I don't know about asserting myself, but then you would do it every time. Because I would be like, yo, I was very intentional about like, Savannah, if you don't want to do it or it doesn't work for you or it doesn't feel good, you're in a space where you can, this is the one space that you can say what you want, how you want, and it's not going to come back at you. It's not going to be met with criticism or judgment or shutting down. It will just be, okay, curiosity. Tell me more about this. What do you mean? How do you feel? So just as a therapist, especially with survivors, they lost their voices a lot of, I don't know, very few survivors will say, I felt helpless, I felt powerless in the event. So they lost their voices in some aspect. So part of them getting their voice back and being empowered and being assertive is us creating a space for that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I do remember the times where you're like, I've been with you this whole time. We've talked about Monroe. Let me see him. And so, just that element of like being personal and trying to find their interest, because talking about some of this stuff is sometimes hard. But you get me talking about my animals. Oh, I could talk all day.
Exactly. And remember, I think it was in 2020. I want to say it was in 2020, where I had to take a step back and listen to you and actually let you lead your therapy, because you were like, Somi, I know I need this, but I don't like it because I got to focus on this. And I was like, I remember saying to your mom too, I said, listen, I'm okay with her being the leader. I'm a good follower. They follow the leader. And, Savannah, and I always would tell you that. I was like, you're in the driver's seat. I'm in the passenger seat. And, but you're essentially the one navigating this, and I follow you. And that's, in my opinion, that's how it should be, which also will take away this element of a hierarchy and, power dynamic, where clients don't feel like they can speak up because they're like, oh, well, she knows it all. She's an expert and she's the one that went to school. And I'm like, can I give you guys a news flash? Everybody that goes to school does not mean they're knowledgeable.
Yeah.
They have information, but we're talking about implementing it not just in your life, but in a healthy way for your clients. So if you are approaching it, I always used to tell you, you know yourself better than I will ever know you.
Yeah.
Because 1 hour a week is not going to, you've been with yourself for like 20 something years. It doesn't do the math and your private thoughts and everything. So to ever tell somebody, I know you better than you know yourself, or I'm the expert, I think, you should run.
Yeah. My dad always says we all put our pants on the same way.
We do. Well, some people may maybe be funny and put it on backwards, but we all do.
Which leads, this also is kind of on like when to stay and when to go.
Yes.
Which I've had that experience. I didn't leave. I should have, as my mom would say, but the therapist that before Somi, I should have walked out of that therapy session. So just finding those red flags, I think a few red flags would be, like we said, I think for me, when you're asking someone questions and they get aggravated, and if you have more questions and they get aggravated, I feel like that's a red flag.
Oh yeah.
And then another red flag is having you tell your story right away.
Yes. That's a huge red flag. Especially like if you're ready,
yeah,
that's a different thing. But if you don't feel ready, and again, I just again, this is me. I can't speak for every therapist. But the thought of meeting somebody for the first time and then saying, tell me what happened.
Yeah.
Just seems really, really odd. And a lot of therapeutic relationships are not different from many other relationships. I don't know if you would walk into an office building and meet some people and be like, oh, tell me about your marriage. And I'm like, wait a second, why? How do I know you?
Right.
So that element, I think it goes back to when you feel empowered and you're in tune, paying attention to when it's time to go. And sometimes you may get it right away. And sometimes it may be over time, which is one of the reasons why I tell people all the time, every month, it needs to be a reassessment, reevaluation of the therapeutic relationship. I actually sometimes do it on a weekly basis or bi-weekly, where I just check in with my client, like, hey, how are you? How are you feeling about how therapy is going? Are your needs being met? Do you feel like you are progressing in the way that you would like? Because also it helps to ensure that you guys don't get stagnant in the process, and you're able to shift and make whatever necessary adjustment. So sometimes it may not be that you need to leave. It just means adjustments need to happen.
Yeah.
And that therapist has to be open and willing to make those adjustments. Now, if you have a therapist, like you said, gets irritated, aggravated, just triggered, or you start asking questions or wanting to be more of a collaborator in your treatment, yeah, it's time to go. And then, of course, if there are biases, if you just, I mean, honestly, at any point, you're like, I don't feel validated. I don't feel empowered. I don't feel safe emotionally or physically. Time to go. Because I've heard horror stories about people being violated physically by a therapist. But because the therapist manipulated their trauma story, they stayed on with this therapist. And I'm just like, whoa, that's no good. So for me, I'm just like, constantly check in, pay attention to yourself, and make sure that it feels good for you. This isn't about the therapist at all. This is about Savannah or whomever. It's like, how do I feel? Do I feel good? Do I feel safe? Do I feel heard? Or do I feel drained? Or do I feel invigorated after a session? These are all important things to kind of pay attention to.
Yeah, most definitely.
I mean, this is a very important conversation because I get it a lot. I like I said on Tuesday, someone was like, I've been looking for a therapist for a long time. I've been looking for a specific therapist. And she's like, you've been what I've been looking for. And I was like, well, you probably wouldn't have met me unless I was at this shoot. And that's unfortunate. Our paths probably wouldn't have crossed if I wasn't at this specific shoot. And then her friend was like, you need to meet this woman. I think she would be a good fit for you. And sometimes, finding a therapist may be through your networks, talking to people. Who is your therapist and how do you feel about them? And what do you think? And that may be helpful for other people.
Before we leave, just to piggyback on what Somi said, don't put yourself in a box. If you can find someone in your area, that is great. But me and Somi have been doing therapy sessions over Zoom, Skype, whatever, before COVID. So get out of your comfort zone just a little bit, just to find the right therapist for you, because even though Zoom is not that face-to-face conversation that we're typically used to, like, it is okay. Somi made it easy on trying to connect with me over Telegram. So yeah, that's what I have to say. Do you have anything else to say, Somi?
No, just, be patient with the process, ask a lot of questions, and do your research.
Yes. Thanks, Somi.
In this video, we talked about questions to ask a therapist when interviewing them, speaking up for yourself, and knowing when to walk out. I hope you enjoyed this video, but wait! Make sure to visit and follow these Instagram accounts. Check out my website, exceptionalheroes.com, to learn more about my patent-pending therapeutic device and to buy some Exceptional Heroes merch. See you guys next time, and always remember to listen, love, connect. Bye!